Yeah. So we're really blessed tonight. We have Dr. Grassi, Freshwater Fishing Hall of Fame, speaker, TV host, fisherman, friend, pastor, is sharing his knowledge. And Tony McCalmant, freshwater fishing extraordinaire, bass champion, fishes. Anyway, got a couple of good guys. There'll be time for questions and answers, so let them know what you're thinking. Thanks.
Thank you, Merlin, and thank you all for coming. I'll be honest with you, this is, I think, only the second Gonzaga game I've missed. And when Merlin, because of the amount of travel and speaking I do and everything, he usually comes to me first and asks, what date do you want? So I picked this date. And I didn't do my math on the playoffs and the tournament. So anyhow, the fact that you're all here, I'm impressed. I'm totally impressed. And I thank you. And I want to thank Merlin and Mark's Marine, who I've known for over 20 years here, that have done a great job, seriously, and I'm not just saying that. We volunteer to do these things, and Merlin is a guy who's really connected in the community and is very much into community support, and we want to support him in every way we can. And Lund's a great product, obviously. I switched from Ranger Boats was a sponsor of mine through 20 boats. And when I came up here, I found out that fiberglass, low-profile boats don't really work well in our heavier waters and ice and everything. So anyhow, tonight I thought, as I was putting together, I thought, gee whiz, if we had anybody show up, I want to give out some prizes. So throughout my 40-minute presentation, I'm going to give out a few gifts. And I think this young man's the youngest guy in the group. And so I'm going to start right off by giving him one of my books. And what's your name, son? Corbin. Corbin? I've signed that for you. And let me ask this question. Who this year, in the last 12 months, has taken a single-parent kid out and taught him how to fish? Is there anybody that's done that? You don't count, Rick, because you've got the table foolers. Raise your hands.
I took the kid out, but he taught me.
61% of our country today, could you pass these back to the guys in the back? 61% of the kids under 18 years of age today will go to bed tonight without a biological father in the home. That's why I do what I do in terms of ministry full-time and working with men's ministry, because we need to begin to work with those single-parent kids that are out there, especially the boys, and help them get into the outdoors. Would you agree with that? Because I was told I was told by a judge once, he says, I've never had a kid in the courtroom that had a fishing license in his back pocket. And so fishing and hunting and archery and those things that I enjoy so well, those are things that our generation needs to begin to work in our neighborhoods with 61% of those kids that are out there who do not have a biological father. So tonight, the Ultimate Fishing Challenge. That's an expression I've used in the book. In fact, the book I gave this young man, it's called Promising Waters. That's what the publisher called it initially, and I wanted the title of the Ultimate Fishing Challenge. So I think in its second printing, it went up to 4 printings. We call it the Ultimate Fishing Challenge. And tonight, we're going to hopefully talk about, Darren, did I do something wrong here? Everything just stopped. Hit the space bar there, Ken. I probably just went off. Yeah. Actually about 30 years ago, I started working with a man that you know well, I think, if you watch any TV, that's Al Lindner. And both of us were teaching fishing me on the West Coast and him in the Midwest and South. And we determined that we needed to have a simple formula to help people understand what fishing's about. So I'm going to use the first part of my presentation today to just cover something. How many of you heard me speak before here at this deal? Well, I anticipated that some of you would be returning, so I'm purposely not going to give you the Jim Grassi scientific part as my part. I'm going to focus more on baits today. But bottom line is, the more you know about fishing, and in terms of the fish and the location, the better fisherman you'll be. Now tonight, most of the presentation today is going to be on presentation. That is the type of lures and whatnot that you need to go after. But clearly, there's an adage that 10% of the fishermen catch 90% of the fish. And 90% of the fish are usually caught in 10% of the lake, the stream, the pond that you're fishing. So if we could help you tonight to become one of those 10% fishermen, would we have accomplished something? Well, that's what we're going to try to do with some of the tips that we're going to give you. The formula that Al and I came up with is F plus L plus P equals fishing success. That's what this is about. The fish factor. The more you can understand about the species you're going after, the better fisherman you'll become. Now, tonight's seminar was advertised as a panfish program, and I am going to allude to crappie and bluegill at the end, but both Tony and I are going to primarily talk about bass, both smallmouth and largemouth. But and they're included in this big family we call panfish. The thing you need to probably walk away with in terms of the fish factor is that the more you can understand about their spawning habits, where they hang out, the types of things. Let me just give you one example. A lot of us, we use baits that have a lot of salt in them or amino acids or have a lot of different flavors to them. For instance, when I pass this worm around, you can smell the tail, and any of you Italians in the group, like myself, will recognize it. That's garlic. Well, garlic is one of those things, as well as anise oil, that bass tend to like, and they'll hang on to the bait longer. So a few people recognize that bass, or fish in general, have not only a olfactory system in terms of what they smell, but they also taste. And so knowing more and more about the fish itself will help you become a better fisherman. This is something you can get online now. There's all kinds of articles. When I started writing about all this from my background in graduate school in fisheries, a lot of people weren't talking about it. Things like, do fish really see color or not? Back then, fish and game departments have a certain stereotype about what fish could do, and that has been changed. But knowing more and more about the fish factor is important. Secondly, is location. The more you know about location and these various things that we've talked about in other seminars, the better fisherman you'll become, whether it's the pattern or the season that they're in. For instance, we're hopefully going to have Hayden Lake melt someday, and the water someday will warm up, and as the water begins to warm up, you're going to be seeing the bass move into shallower waters. And the smallmouth will move in first. They'll usually take up that water column from about 10 to 20 feet. And then the largemouth will move in a week or two after they move in and begin to take the more shallow waters. Knowing those kind of things and about location is really important. There's three things a realtor will tell you are the most important things. What are they? Location, location, location. And that's what bugs you, even as people like myself and Tony, is we can go out today as an example and maybe find some fish, but because of the seasonal changes and the water temperature changes and maybe low fronts coming in or something, tomorrow we could go out and not necessarily be successful in that same spot. And that's why 10% of the fishermen catch 90% of the fish, is that they have found that spot. I maintain that except for the winter months, roughly 10% of the fish in that lake will be feeding at one time or another. It's just that you've got to keep them in a place, or find them in that place where they're feeding. And for instance, bass a lot of times will move from, let's say you're all bass, you'd move from deep water to this structure here. And maybe you'd feed for a while, then you might move in closer and ultimately work your way up all in a day. And so if you happen to catch them at 10 o'clock at this point where they're feeding, and you go back the next day, assuming the environmental conditions haven't changed, you could be very successful in creating what we call a pattern. So today we're going to talk about presentation. This mic keeps cutting out here. Presentation. In any given day, we'll have fish in one of these three modes. It'll either be what we call inactive, that is to say they're not doing a lot of moving around. Water temperature has a big bearing on that. So today, for instance, if you found a water that wasn't iced over and you went out, more than likely you're going to find that they're kind of in a winter hibernation pattern, which means they may only take a crawfish or a bait fish in once every 3 days or so, because they're cold critters, cold water critters, and their digestive system isn't processing. They don't need a lot of food. Conversely, in the summer, that same bass, say a 4-pound bass, might take 3, 4 crayfish and a bait fish. He's what we call an active feeder. And as we tournament fish or just fish for pleasure, what we're looking for are those active feeding fish or the neutral fish that could be turned on. For instance, most of us probably had dinner before we came here. So if I said to you, well, here's a bowl of spaghetti, would you like to have that right now? You'd probably say, man, I'm stuffed from dinner. You know, actually I am, because I stopped to watch the game, and I'm normally about 30 pounds lighter. Just ate a lot tonight. But, you know, if the same guy, if I went over here and put the bowl of spaghetti down and brought you an ice cream sundae, you might go, well, I'm full, but you just convinced me. And so what we're going to talk about right now are some of the lures and techniques that you can use that help turn those fish on, help those fish that are active feeders and the neutral feeders to click them on so that they suddenly start biting, hitting your line. One of the things, an adage in fishing is more lures are made to catch fishermen than fish. And so one of the things we wanted to do today is respect your time and your resources and the time that you're going to put in on the lake to help you pick through some lures that are fish-catching lures. Does that make sense? So I'm going to kind of whip through this in the half hour that's left, and I'm going to pretend like, in all honesty, that let's say 2 weeks from now, I hope to be out there fishing. If I can find some place that the ice is melted, and I'll start hitting some of the lakes that have the southern exposure and western exposure in some of those banks. One of the first lures I used, and this is a lure I used in Mexico. I've been to Mexico, feel sorry for me, twice in the last 3 months, and this lure caught more fish than any other lure. And this will be one of the lures I'll use to begin fishing. And what this is essentially, it's a Texas rig worm, and it's on a Carolina rig. Texas rig just means how the hook sits in there. And this bait it's a Carolina rig bait, and I put a bead in there The only thing I'm missing, because I left them down in Mexico, is a little stop here. It's a bobber stop, so that these sinkers, when you're casting, don't go flying up your line and mess up the location of your cast. So there'll be a little bobber stopper up here, just a little piece of rubber. But every time this moves through the water, it's making a clicking noise. Why? Because fish here, through their lateral line and through their inner ear, they'll pick up noises. It'll draw them to the bait. The second thing this rig will do, it'll stir up mud on the bottom as you drag it along. And as you drag it along, this worm then, following behind, will follow it, but oftentimes it will be floating up here just gently, kind of naturally flowing around. The other thing that I'll do is that I will pick a worm that has a lot of flexibility in the back, that has a type of tail, either a flip tail or a finesse tail or something, that moves a lot of water. Why? The bass, the fish, pick up on their lateral line that vibration in the water. So you want something that has a tail to it of some type, and I'm trying to, just not to disrespect you guys by using all kinds of terms that we use in the professional world, so to speak, but just tell about basic things. You want a tail that actually is thinned out here and that can move a lot of water. So as this goes through the water, it swims. Now, one of the primary things you're going to see here, everything I'm going to show you right now is designed to cover a lot of water. Because if I were to go out there in the next 2 weeks, I would be no different than you folks. That is, where the heck are they? Okay? And the way I sort that out, quite frankly, is by covering a lot of water in a day. Because I want to generally find where they are. This rig will allow me to go down deep. It'll allow me to move quickly. To give you an idea, and I'm not saying this boastfully at all, I'm just giving you a fact, that even in Mexico, where fishing was rather good, everyone that got in my boat, I caught more fish than them. Not necessarily bigger fish, because that just happens to where, if your worm was in the right place. But I caught more fish. And they kept saying, how come you're catching more fish than I am? I kept telling them, because I'm covering more water in a day than you are with a worm. They would do just a simple Texas rig worm without the weight. The weight would be down here on the worm, and they're throwing it out there and dragging it. Well, then meanwhile, because I can work this faster in the water, I'm covering more water in a day, hence the potential for getting by more fish and getting bit is there. By the way, I have 7 rods. 2 years ago I came here, I walked out, I had 6 rods and I walked out with 5. So I'm going to pass these brand new rods around just so that you can see the rods. They're one of my new sponsors, Temple Fork Outfitters. And you can see some of the new technology in reels and in rods. And the other thing I'm going to try to do as we buzz along here is just teach you a few of the things, the tricks, you might say, that separate this rig from other rigs you would use, like, for instance, putting a glass bead so that you can create a little noise. You'll notice the distance here isn't like 2 feet or 3 feet. It's fairly close to where the weight is. The worm will track where the weight is. Secondly, you'll notice I've taken, this is very good line. It's a Seagar line, but I've taken this line and I've actually taken a black marking pen, permanent marking pen, and I've drawn little lines around the reel on the line. And you say, why would you do that? Well, it creates a modeling effect on the line. It's just another little technique you can use so that they don't get line shy. Now, with the dirty water we're having, that's not going to be a problem, but I thought I'd do that just to show you, because as our water clears up, I don't want them seeing that line on a day where there's a tough bite become line shy. I want to mark that line, model it up, or use my green lines or whatever. So I'm just going to pass these around. These are the exact rods rigged up the way I'm going to use them, hopefully 2 weeks from now. This happens to be a 7.3 medium action rod. And so you can kind of get a feel for the rod and the balance of the equipment, which is important. The next lure that I would use, I'd put on a heavier rod. Probably this is 7.3 also. What we're doing in what the manufacturers are doing that's really interesting, and one of the things I wanted to tell you about today, and Tony works for a very good rod company that he's sponsored by, but you're going to find that rods, good rods, are getting lighter, that they're ergonomically, the feel, the grip is better, and because they're lighter, and the kind of lines we're using now that transmit more vibration, we're able to feel the fish better. So for those of you that have the old fiberglass rods, or some of you, if you even have old wood rods, I have a few hanging up in my garage, that's where they're going to stay. Those rods will not pick up the vibration and the sensitivity the way these rods will. And yet, even with the lightness of the rods, the balance of the rod, as this gentleman was just doing, is there. So you can get good, accurate casts, but by having lighter weight rods that are very sensitive, the way they're made now, the sensitivity of the rods are double to triple what they were when I was tournament fishing back in those days, so that you can feel the bite. So the next bait I would recommend to you is what's called a chatterbait, or some will call it a blade jig. And basically what this is, chatterbait makes actually, I want to say Yahoo. Booyah. There we go. I'm not finding the words tonight. Booyah makes it. And this is one of the baits I use not only in Mexico, but here. If instead of going with a plain jig, that if I were flipping it or pitching a jig at a tree or bush or something, I could spend a lot of time working that bush. And there will be a time when the fish will come close to what we call cover or structure. Structure or cover is simply brush, logs, even a cement wall, stairs, or whatever that go in to the water. They will pick up the heat, okay, the ambient temperature, and transmit that in the water. And if you went over with a temperature probe, you would see that a tree or a rock wall or something, the area, the water right around that might be 1 or 2 degrees warmer than the water out in the open area. And that will draw the bass in particular, and the other panfish, closer to that bush, okay? But remember, I said if I'm going to go out in 2 weeks, those fish that are right now, and Tony will talk more about this, lying in the deep water, in the channels, are going to be moving towards the brush. They're not going to be right in the brush. Now, I would use this same rod, this 7.3 heavy-duty rod, and tie a straight jig on it once I know they're closer into the brush. But as they're moving in the brush, I want to search them. I want to use a lure that can find where those fish are. By this lure, I can swim it through the water. It actually goes through the water, makes a little noise, and in this case, I'd probably put a bigger tail on, quite frankly, to give me a little more weight. But you have a tail, so all this movement and the lure itself doing this with the skirt will attract fish. I'll go to a blue and black. Why? Because the water is dirty. And so I want to have a darker lure. Now that's a heavier rod than what we passed around. The next bait that I would try, and I'd have all these rods rigged in the boat, and that isn't to say that you should go out and buy 7 or 8 rods, although for you men, the excuse that you give your wife is this: honey, the kitchen is your domain, right? And she'd go, yes. Would I expect you to cook the dinner with just 1 pot? Well, no. Well, honey, this is my domain. And like you need more than 1 pot, I need several kinds of rods. That worked for about the first 6 months of a marriage, and after that, it didn't work anymore. But it's a good story to tell. One of the lures I like to use in locating fish is a swim bait. Swim bait's one of my favorite lures. And if used correctly, it is a great lure to locate fish. These other lures and rods that I'm passing around are designed to be worked primarily on the bottom, not in a horizontal way, but more of in a vertical. So I would be jigging these, or in the case of that swim worm, that power worm there, okay, I would swim it along. I would do it with pulls, okay? A standard regular jig, I would literally jig it up, reel my rod tip down, jig it up, never giving the fish any slack. This bait you can use in a jigging fashion, that is to have it literally go up and down in the water column to the bottom and then swim it back up. You can give it a quick jerk so it goes up, and then as it falls down, this big paddle tail in the water will do this. It'll swim along, fall back down. That mimics a injured bait fish. So the bass are going to go after fish like that real quick. The swim bait also can work horizontally, where I'll throw it out and I'll do the countdown system. These will sink about a foot a second. This one will be a little quicker because it's a bigger head, but roughly a foot a second. So if I want to fish 10 foot down and I'm in 20-foot water, I'll throw this out and I'll count to 10, and I'll begin to swim it. And I might change the way I'm working. I'll pull and then reel the rod tip. Pull, so I'm getting a little bit of this in the 10, 12, 8-foot deal. Then there are other times that I'll just reel it horizontally and just have it swim through the water column. What is particularly effective, in all honesty, is to take this, and particularly if you have someone new in the boat that isn't real good at casting or whatever, just cast it out into deep water and just reel it very slow along the bottom. Let it bump along the bottom or the rocks and through the twigs. Hopefully you don't get stuck. And just move it along slowly. When we were in Mexico 2.5 months ago, one of my best friends had his wife with him in the boat. And she's actually a pretty good outdoorsman. I mean, she really is. But she determined that she wasn't going to try to compete against her husband, who wanted the front of the boat and doing all the stuff, right? He's a pro fisherman. So she sat in the back of the boat for 3.5 days with a swim bait on, and all she did was throw it out, let it hit the bottom, and start reeling very slowly. She caught the most big that I use. I think that's a 7-foot, and that has some good action to it. It's a medium action rod. Now I'm going to pass this around too so you can see. Now the colors I pick are the colors I would start with. Some of you are taking pictures and I encourage you to do that. Those are the colors I'd start with, but I want you to know every one of these lures comes in a variety of colors, and I think Tony's going to cover some of that in his presentation. Here's some of my favorite swim baits. And you say, well, where do you get all this stuff? I'm going to recommend to you, and I think Tony would too, the best place in town to go to get the help and get the right colors is Becker's Tackle, right across the street from Costco. He's just in a little shop there. He's a friend of ours, and more importantly, he's a guy that really knows fishing. And he'll put you on the right color. Another good place to go is Fins and Feathers. Bless you. Okay, so we've got, 3 rods going around. Okay? I'll pick up the pace. One of the lures I like to use is a what they call a lipless crankbait. Back in the day, we just called them Cordell was one, and Rattletrap were some of the first companies to make them, but they're a rattling lure. There's no bill on it to make it dive or anything. Much like the swim bait we were just talking about, you can work this off the bottom, or you can work it in a horizontal fashion, or you can actually jig it. And that's one of the ways I like to work it. Remember this, in the fall, a lot of your bait fish are dying, particularly if you were in any lake where they have shad, which they don't have many lakes up here that have shad, but shad in the winter die, and as they die, they kind of float down like this. So the minute you can pull that off the bottom and let it fall back down, keeping a taut line as it's falling, because a lot of times that's when they're going to hit it. But any lure you can get, like these lures, this is a newer company to America. They've been in Canada for years, and they're called Kamloops lures. The thing I like about this, it's designed, it has a weight up front, it has rattle in it, it looks like a crayfish. They have ones that look like perch and whatever. But when it lands on the bottom, the hooks are up. And it's a unique lure from that standpoint. And it really does a good job. And the reason I picked this color is that right now, not now, but when the Spokane River gets safe enough that you can go out there and actually fish it, I'll be using that lure. Because rattle trap type lures, lipless crankbait lures are really good in the river, in the Spokane River, once it's safe enough to go out there. I mean, in that color, the crayfish right now are that color. And the bass will come up and hit those things like crazy. Let's see. Some of you already got a couple of those. Ken, you have one back there, I think. Or someone does back there. The next lure I would use is a searching lure. Remember, I'm giving you lures that I use to help search out where the fish are. Once I've established where the fish are, I will go to oftentimes a different method that Tony will be covering to talk about then how to focus and concentrate on those depths of water. But right now, I'm just trying to find fish. I don't know if they're still 40 feet deep or if they're moving towards the shallows. I don't know. I want to find them first. So one of the baits I will use is a crankbait, a big bill crankbait. And I'll get something that looks like a perch or a bluegill or some of the type of sculpin fish that we have as baits, and I'll crank those. And here again, I'll use different techniques. Sometimes I'll just literally crank them, and as the harder you crank and whatnot, the deeper they dive. Okay? Now this, for a lot of my fishing, would be considered a medium-sized crankbait. Sometimes for smallmouth, I'll go down in size, and other times for largemouth, if I'm focusing on big fish, I'll go up in size. That is, the bill is bigger, it's a bigger plug, and it will go deeper. Again, the type of rod I use here, this Temple Fork rod, in this case, I use a medium lure because I like a lot of flexibility in the tip on a crankbait. And the same thing on a spinnerbait. I'd use the same thing, which is a good seeking lure. The reason I kept it to 6 is 1 time, and 2, 6 a half dozen. So I kept it to a half dozen. But the reality is that another good searching bait is a spinnerbait. And I did not put one on tonight. Maybe Tony will cover that. So that's a crankbait. As the water warms up and the fish are becoming more active feeders and they're coming in closer, I'll go to what I call, back in my day, it was called a twitching bait. These minnow-shaped kind of lures, we have all kinds of names for them today. But basically, I'm going to rip this down. Now, a lot of people will troll with a minnow-shaped lure, whether it's a Rebel, Rapala, whatever. They'll troll with these and do very well. It works very well that way. I work it totally different because what I am doing, I'm casting out, and as it hits the water, I will make about 5 or 6 reels till it gets diving, and then I'll sit, and it looks like I'm trying to beat a snake with a stick if you're watching me from shore, because I will sit there, and I'll literally pump it down and reel it. We call them jerk baits now. But back in the day when we started this revolution in California, quite frankly, A lot of people weren't using them that way, and we call it twitching, but they're basically, you're jerking them down. You want this thing to be as erratic as possible. And as they get erratic and start jumping around in the springtime, when the fish, that switch goes on just before spawn, they're looking to tackle something. And this bait is particularly effective. Anything that looks like this, and you can get them in yellow perch color, you can get them in bluegill color, whatever. This happens to be one of my favorite ones. I won, myself and my partner, to show you how things can change as you come in the spring. I took some friends out 2 weeks in a row. I hit the east bank, it's west and southwest facing, 2 different weeks. We both caught limits, caught and released them. The 3rd week, I was in a tournament, which I don't do a lot of tournaments anymore, but I was in a tournament with a friend, went right back to that spot with a wacky worm that Tony will probably talk about, and guess what? They weren't there. And we had a front come in, and I could see boats moving around on a lake. It was like people weren't finding where they were. We certainly were. I mean, I thought we'd load up the boat. No way. So my buddy and I, he was also from that southern land called California. We were in a club that kind of perfected the jerk bait technique back then. This is like 40 years ago. And we decided we were just going to put on jerk baits and see if we could locate fish anywhere. Because once these start going erratically in the water, and by the way, you get a jerk bait with a big bill, you can jerk them down to 18 feet. 18 feet. And we got the bigger one and started jerking them, and all of a sudden, boom, we got a 4-pound smallmouth. Before the day was over, we caught 30 fish. And we were fortunate to win the tournament. I mean, no one had more than 3 fish, but we had 30 fish that we caught and released. We weighed in nothing but 4 to 6, well, 5.5 pound fish, all on the jerkbait. We couldn't get a fish to bite on soft plastics. So again, the rod selection is critical. I won't go through all the nomenclatures on the rods. So my last rod I'm going to pick is what Tony's used to seeing me up here, because my days of fishing back in the day and a lot of the articles I wrote, TV programs, was all on ultralight fishing. It wasn't quite this lightweight though, Tony. But this is one of the new TFO rods. And now this rod, we're going to switch to panfish. If Merlin out in front of his house has a dynamite crappie hole there. If I were going to fish crappie or bluegill, I'd put a little bobber on, depending where they are. If they're next to docks or something, I might not use the bobber. And a little tiny jig, whether it's a hair jig or soft plastic, I would use that. And I'd throw it out and basically just work it very slow. Just have that jig dart and dive a little bit. But I'm going to be using a rod like that. I'm not going to be using one of these big rods. Hence, again, the story about the pan with your wife in the kitchen and all that. You've got to have at least one ultralight rod in your collection, and this is a super ultralight. You could definitely step up from this one. This one's a real, fun rod to catch a fish on. Now, there will be times, quite frankly, you'll throw next to a dock for a bluegill, and there's a big old bass sitting there that just wants that last cherry on the cake. He's already eaten 3 or 4 soft baits, but now he wants that cherry on the cake. You'll see this come out and take it, and you have a 5-pound bass on here. Now that's real fun. That becomes real fun. But pass those around, and if I'll be in the back. And if you want to have the rods end up there, all 7 of them, that would be great. And Tony's going to come up shortly. One of the things I like about fishing, and pheasant hunting would be the closest thing to it, which I love to do, is a fellowship that happens. Whether it's Tony and myself or Merlin or going with Ken here, Chaplain Ken, we have fun. We have fun. And, you can make fishing anything you want it to be. There's still people, believe it or not, that just have a bamboo rod with a little piece of line and a bobber. And you know what? They'll have as much fun as us guys running around crazy with our big bass boats and all that. The point is that you can get into fishing at whatever level you want, but the ultimate thing is that it's fun, being with people. And I come back, all the way back to where we started. Make sure you take a kid fishing. Let him know you and glean from you the kinds of things that you've learned in life. Share your story, share your faith, share what the good things are, what the bad things are in life, and help these kids out. That's an important thing for me. And so one of the things I do is I do some guiding, local guiding, but the majority of what I do is I take you and your family out in a boat, or whoever you want to bring, and I teach you how to fish. That's where my passion is. I wrote the first curriculum for colleges on fundamentals of fishing. It was a 2-unit college course taught in the university. My point is simply, if you'd like to have some further instruction from people like myself or Tony, I have some cards in the back. You can take a card. Also, I'd encourage you, if you're interested in really super bass fishing, I'm talking 100 bass a day, 100 bass a day, up to 10, 12 pounds. You'll definitely catch more 4 and 5 pounders than you ever seen in your life. I've got some brochures back there on that. And if you want to know more about these rods that you're handling, I literally strung them up today. They just came in to me. These are the newest rods out from this company, Temple Fork Outfitters. Help yourself to catalog. You've been a great audience, and I think I'm almost on time. And questions? Sure. Because I can move it through the water, okay? A Texas rig, to work it as fast as I work the Carolina, I overwork the worm. Now, that may sound goofy, but as you work that sinker, I can work it a little faster, and yet the worm kind of is doing the lazy-daisy thing out there with that tail's called a phenom tail, is what we used to call it, that big tail swishing water around. It has its own mind. I'm working the sinkers faster than I can work, than I want to work that worm. Does that make sense? Yeah. The worm just kind of meanders. So even though the sinker's moving fast, the worm has more flexibility. Whereas if I'm directly tied to that worm, whatever I do with that rod, okay, transmits right to that worm. Now, there are many times I use a Texas rig worm, and quite frequently I use a Texas rig worm. But because I'm able to shake my rod tip and actually get some vibration in that worm, where I can't do that with the Carolina rig. Because I can shake it all day and all I'm doing is moving that weight, the worm hasn't moved. You see what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Okay, anybody else real quick? Sir. Right. Left hand. Yeah. That's a great question. Actually, the guy I fished with in Mexico just a month ago, he has all left-hand reels, including his bait casters. When I started, back in when Noah was filling up the ship, the only what we call left-hand model was a 5001 Garcia. They only made one reel, and all of the reels made in earth that was with a crank on a level wind reel, bait casting reel on the left. Now, every company and every brand has a left and right hand model in almost all their models. If I were starting out today, I would probably do nothing but the left hand retrieve. Why? Because every time I change that rod, I risk missing a little tap. That's why we've got real sensitive rods. Real quick.
I noticed you were using a lot of monofilament lines.
Yep. I personally do, except on spinning rods. I've had very poor luck because I was one of the original people in the United States, when the first braids came out, Strin was a sponsor, and they gave me all kinds of braids. I could have had a garage full if I wanted to, and I just had nothing but frustration with them. It's a personal choice. I use fluorocarbon on my monofilament for anything that's diving. On floating lures, like surface lures, I'll use a regular mono. I like to stretch, quite frankly, for spinnerbait, for twitching, or jerkbait fishing. I still call it twitching. For crankbaits, I like to stretch the monofilament. I don't want that immediate set because I'm going to rip the lure right out of the fish's mouth. For soft plastics and whatnot, I love the braids. I think they're great. I don't particularly like them on crankbaits, on bait casting reels. So one more question, and I'll take some more in the back. Sure? I would not use a braid. Oh, on a spinning reel, yes, definitely. Yes. In fact, what I do is I use a braid with a monofilament leader. So I have the best of both. I have the transparency of a fluorocarbon, but I have the strength and the sensitivity of a braid. So some of these, like if you looked at my drop shot that Tony will probably be covering and my wacky worm stuff, you'll see a braid line on spinning reels.
Thank you, Merlin. Thanks everyone for coming. I'm quite surprised, like Jim mentioned, about the turnout with game night, and I think as opposed to last year with the warmer weather, we were all out fishing by now, and this year we're all cabin fever and just wanting to get out and talk fishing. So
I'm still iced in.
yeah, I won't be fishing Merlin's dock anytime soon. But real quick, the real weekend that Merlin mentioned, it's going to be a great event this year. 2 years ago we started that. It's a brainchild with a thing we came up with called Real Sportsmen. We're a local hunters and fishermen that have a dream to start a television series, hunting and fishing in the Northwest. Our goal is to build a sponsorship and the excitement around that to where we can eventually quit our day jobs and go hunting and fishing in the Northwest and film and hopefully air on the Pursuit or Outdoor Channel. It's a few of us local guys. We started the Real Weekend 2 years ago as an event to bring people in, and what we did is we had a bass and pike fishing tournament the same day together, and we rented the McEwen Park downtown Coeur d'Alene next to the resort, and a lot of vendors came in and had the park full of vendors, and we had a giant stage, a weigh-in stage. It was a great event. Last year we got kiboshed by the park not having available dates for the time we wanted to run our tournament. This year, completely different. We've got huge sponsors coming on board to promote this event. June 10th and 11th, like Merlin mentioned, will be at McEwen Park downtown. It's open to the public. There's going to be a ton of vendors in the park that weekend. Boats, RVs, food vendors. We'll have a bass and pike tournament. It's an open tournament, open to anyone. You can enter that tournament and fish on Saturday as a team. You can enter either just the bass, or you can enter just pike, or you can enter both. Dan. I cannot fish it, sorry. But I will tell you, with this late spring, June 10th is going to be an amazing time to be fishing Lake Coeur d'Alene. It's not uncommon to see 5 bass limits on that lake weighing in excess of 25, 28 pounds. And June 10th is going to be prime time for big pre-spawn fish. So pike fishing, I'm not an expert on, but last year, or 2 years ago, we had some guys that caught some really good pike during that event too. We also run that in congruent this year. We've teamed up with Lund, and brought their young angler program that they've all done for years to the inland Northwest. So Sunday will be the Lund Young Angler program, where an adult fishes with 2 kids, 17 and under, for a chance to win a Lund boat motor trailer package. Those kids that win that tournament that day win the package, and they also win an expense-paid trip to Ontario for a national championship. That we're really excited about. We're excited to have Lund on board in March Marine with that event. Our whole goal with Real Sportsman is to bring kids into the outdoors, much like Jim mentioned at the opening of his thing. We want to get kids, especially underprivileged kids, out in the outdoors. A lot of our shows that we're going to start trying to film the next year or two to get on TV for you all to watch is going to be us taking a kid fishing or a kid hunting that would not normally have the chance to do that. So look forward to that. I'd love to see you guys there. Real Weekend, June 10th and 11th at McEwen Park, downtown Coeur d'Alene. Keep an eye on Marks Marine's website and their Facebook page for updates on that. Also, you can find us Real Sportsman with 2 E's, Real Sportsman, on Facebook and realsportsman.com. You can keep track of that. We'll create events and have all that out to the public as soon as we have a little bit better information to give to you. So, I'm sorry, Rick? When we get the information out, you'll have that answer, but normally typically you will come to Marks Marine to register. There'll be other areas in town that you can pick up, but normally registering the day of the tournament is not allowed without a late fee. It's just too hard on the guys running the tournament. So we'll have all that once we get the entry fees or the flyers done and the fee or the forms out. You'll see them all over, and you'll have the chance to get in on that. So great deal, and we're looking forward to some giant fish. So even if you're not fishing, come down that weekend and check out the weigh-in. We'll have a great stage. We'll have TV cameras rolling, a lot of different vendors going on. It'll be a great time. So. The youth tournament, the Lund tournament, will be Sunday the 11th. The open tournament for anybody will be Saturday the 10th. Yes, both same weekend. So with no further ado, I will get into probably touch base a little bit on some things that Jim talked about. He really stressed finding fish. You can't catch them if you don't find them. And that's really one thing that a lot of people miss is we like to go out and we like to say, well, last year at this time, I went out on Hayden and back in McLean's Bay, and I cleaned their clocks on a spinnerbait. It was March 15th, and we wrecked them. So this year we go out March 15th. Let's say there wasn't any ice this week. If the ice just came off a week ago, you're not going to go in that same spot and clean your clock with the same bait you did on that date last year. The trick is to understand what you're up against. This isn't really working that great, is it? I'll try to talk loud, and it'll be too loud when the speaker's working and just right when it's not. So I just want to stress that understanding the fish that you're targeting and what their seasonal patterns are is going to put fish in the boat. There's multiple different baits and different patterns any given day on a tournament that we fish that will put fish in the boat. One guy might bring in a big stringer of fish throwing a spinnerbait. Another guy brought in a big stringer of fish flipping a jig. Somebody else was throwing a jock shot. Somebody else was throwing a buzz bait. But they all caught fish. The point is, everybody figured out that pattern for that lake, and there's multiple patterns working on the same lake at the same time. The difference is, the other guys that didn't catch them that day, none of them knew where the fish were at, or they couldn't figure out what to use to get those fish to bite. Okay, I don't have that up, Jim, and I don't really know where to find it on your page, but I'm just going to kind of talk a little bit. If we happen to get it up while I'm talking, I'm not sure. If it looks better down, then go ahead. But one of the things that we want to know is how do we find them? You know, we can go out and use a search bait like Jim spoke about. A lot of different ways to search for fish. You want a search bait because it's a moving bait that you can cover a lot of water quickly and really dial in the fish. Fishing slow with a drop shot when you don't know if there's fish around is not a good way to find them. It takes too long to fish an area. Case in point, I got out on the water the first time of the year just this Sunday. Went to a lake in Washington. And I was asked by a guy, I don't have a boat yet, mine's not done. It'll be here next week. I was asked by a nice guy months ago, hey, would you take me to this lake and go fishing with me? And I said, sure, we'll go. And so we went. Hadn't been there all year. Hadn't found anything yet. So I'm throwing a lipless crankbait, like a rattle trap that Jim showed. I'm making a lot of casts. I'm moving the bait real fast. I'm trying to find fish. But once I got a bite, he wanted to sit in one spot and fish it all day. Now, this time of year, there's fish moving up, and there's active fish here, and there's active fish here, and there's active fish here. Now, you could get one fish to trigger. He might be a lone fish. You don't know. But if you sit there and sit there and sit there and don't get bit, it's time to move. So when Jim talks about a moving bait, a search bait, what we're trying to do is we're not necessarily trying to get a bite. We're trying to get multiple bites in different areas of the lake, and then we put together a pattern, and then we go back out and we really catch them. When you're really just searching for fish, if you get a bite, great. Log that in your memory. What was I using? How deep was the fish? How was I working the bait? Where was it located? Was it on a flat next to a row of docks, next to a channel swing? Was it in a brush at the end of a flat? Was it in the back of the bay? Was it in a secondary point leading into the bay? Where that's what you're going to log into your head. Thank you very much. And does this have my mapping on it? End of slideshow. No, it doesn't. Okay, so these are just baits we're talking about here. And Jim touched on a lot of these, so I won't get into that much, because what I really wanted to talk to you about was when Jim talked to you about locating fish, now I'm going to talk about baits on what I'm going to use to target bigger fish. Not just bites, but what I'm going to target in tournament mode when I want the 5 biggest fish in the lake. Otherwise, I don't get paid, right? So once we've found them, we've thrown our crankbait, we've thrown our lipless, and that may be the bait to get you the tournament win too. I don't know, but even when I'm not tournament fishing, who else likes to just catch big fish? I like to catch fish, but I really like to catch big ones. And I have a bit of an addiction. I can go out all day with one bait in my hand for 1 or 2 bites. I just want to catch that giant, you know. I can go out any other day and I can catch, you know, plenty of 2-pounders. I'm interested in that 4, 5, 6, 7, even bigger pound fish. And we live in a place in the country where a lot of people look at Idaho like bass fishing in Idaho, right? I mean, they look at Brandon Polinick or now Daryl Okamika, both in the Fishing the Classic, which starts tomorrow, by the way, Bassmaster Classic. They interview these guys from Idaho and say, how'd you learn how to catch bass? Well, Lake Coeur d'Alene, right out our back door, is one of the top 10 bass fishing lakes in the country. It's listed in Bassmaster Magazine in their top 100 bass lakes. We're in the top 10. In all the lakes in the country that produce Florida, Texas, Oklahoma, for Great Lakes, for giant smallmouth, we have one of the best bass fisheries in the country. Why? They base that off of weights it takes to win tournaments. And the weights it takes to win tournaments on Lake Coeur d'Alene mirror and or best weights that it takes to win other tournaments in some of the best lakes in the country down south. And they have Florida strain largemouth, which we don't. Now, I will say we're blessed because we don't have the fishing pressure. We don't have the numbers of bass that they have down south. Those lakes produce thousands upon thousands more bass than our lakes do. It's really important, by the way, and I will bring this up. There's probably some people that are going to hate me for this, but we got to put them back, guys. They have to go back in the lake. We do not have the numbers of fish here to support a major harvest of bass. They don't grow that fast. They don't reproduce as much. We don't have the food. We don't have the numbers. What we do have is a phenomenal fishery if we protect it. So with that in mind, I want to go out and I want to get some big fish. I'm going to do that a number of different ways. Jim mentioned a bladed jig. He called it a chatterbait, a bladed jig, many different manufacturers. That's a great, not only is it a search bait, but early in the year, this is a great big fish bait. I'm speaking primarily largemouth tonight. If you guys have any questions on that or smallmouth stuff, please throw me your questions. I'd rather tell you something you want to know than me telling you something that you may already know. So I'm just going to go through some stuff. Holler if you have any. But a bladed jig, great bait, especially in dirty water. This bait puts out a ton of vibration with this blade in the front. Jim already passed one around, so I won't get into that much. But I like to throw a small swim bait trailer. You guys all saw the swim bait that he had on the jig head that went away, ran around. That's the exact bait that I'm using on a trailer for a bladed jig. I just want something with a little bit of bulk. Most of the action comes from this blade on the front and the vibration on this bait. You're not really worried about vibration coming off the tail of this bait. You just want a little bit of a bulk so when they get close to it, it looks like a bait fish. Okay. I'm going to throw this on a 7.3 to 7.5 foot medium heavy with about 15-pound fluorocarbon. Sir, you had a question?
Is there a good time to fish like the bluffs or the cliffs on Ponderay?
Yeah, I guess it depends on where you're talking about, but
This area around here.
that's a tough question to answer, really. He's asking if there's a great time to fish the bluffs on Lake Ponderay, and I don't really know
Well,
which.
I've only fished it a couple of times. I don't
Sure.
know the lake very well, but
And I'm not sure which ones you're referring
I
to,
don't
but
know the names of them either.
there's, steep bluff walls are great,
Yeah, really
more so in the summer or fall. Springtime, you're looking for flats and flat points adjacent to spawning areas. These fish have one thing in mind. When they start moving up, they need to feed. And they're going to do that as they move into their spawning areas. They're not going to be on really steep stuff. You'll get a bite or two, but most of the time you're going to find them on some kind of flat or a point adjacent to a flat.
Okay.
And then they start moving up because once they feed in the spring, then they got to go spawn. So they're going to be in those areas.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sir. Talk about a bladed jig. Go ahead.
Primarily, are you using a white skirt?
No. I use these kind of as a demonstration now. A white skirt or chartreuse and white skirt. And Jim mentioned earlier he had a black and blue tied on. If it's really dirty water, something really dirty like stained muddy water, which is where you'll find your largemouth early in the year, and smallmouth for that matter, I want something somewhat dark and have some kind of a silhouette. So black or black and blue is going to be my first choice in dirty water. As the water gets slightly stained to clear, then I'm going to go to a brighter, more natural color, or chartreuse and white, or a white and green, or something like that. So my main goal is to trigger a fish on a more natural thing. The big fish especially, but chartreuse and white. I would say, to really answer your question truthfully, try them both. Go from a white and chartreuse to a black and blue, go to a green pumpkin. Try them all. Because that technically will change day to day. And not only that, I've seen it change hour to hour that same day. So they might eat a black and blue one in the morning, and by lunchtime they're switched over to a bright white. And you can't get a bite on a black and blue. So you just have to experiment a little bit. The biggest thing is to find them. Once you've found the fish, then you can you can try multiple different presentations to get them to bite. If you know they're there, keep switching up. If that helps. Yes, sir.
Are you mostly working docks with largemouth, or are you working back bays at different times of the year?
Yeah, and just so everybody can hear, he asked me if I'm usually working docks or backs of bays for, and then we're talking spring, I assume, pre-spawn type stuff. Both. Yeah, it really depends. You may be working the back of a bay with docks. Basically, with a bladed jig, for instance, or a lipless crankbait, you're trying to fish flats that have grass, clumps, things like that, where fish might be not up on the dock, but yes, I've caught a lot of fish throwing a chatterbait or a spinnerbait around docks. It just basically where they're at. And if the sun's shining and cold water, and you got a good wood dock that's got one temperature, the heat from the wood collecting from the sun, number two, shade and cover. If it's in an area where fish are actively feeding and there's bait, yeah, I would definitely throw it. And I wouldn't slow down to throw a jig on a dock and start pitching and shaking a jig if they're whacking a chatterbait on the way by. You know, if you're running docks and they're smoking that, there's no reason to slow down and spend all that time on that same dock. Cover as many docks as you can. And then turn around with a jig and go pick up the ones you left behind. The biggest thing is cover, like Jim said, cover as much water as possible so that you know they're not just on that dock. They're on every dock in every bay that looks like this. So I can go from this bay, once they quit biting or I get them spooked, I go around the corner into the next bay and do the exact same thing. And when those are all done biting, I go to the next bay, and then I turn around and go to the first one and start all over because they forgot about me by then. Yeah, question? They can, yeah. You can spook fish. It really depends. It depends on what mode I'm in. If I'm catching fish in an area and I know I can continue to get bit there, I'll just keep fishing. But if I'm catching fish there and I know there's more fish and they shut off, I need to leave them alone. I need to let them calm down. It might be your depth finder needs to be shut off. You might need to lay off your trolling motor a little bit, turn the speed down. There's a lot of different things there might be extra boat traffic in the area that they need to just chill out. So once they quit biting, I'll just move on. And I'll find other fish that are unpressured or haven't seen a bait for 3 days. You know, if you fish in the same dock and you keep throwing in there, they get conditioned to it. Especially when they see a couple of their buddies getting yanked out. Then they start, this isn't their first rodeo, and I pick on Hayden Lake as a perfect example. That is a very, very high-pressured lake. Those bass get spooky fast because everybody's out there all the time fishing the same thing, and it's not that big of a lake. Those fish get really spooky. And, yeah, you can go catch 2 and 2.5 pounders all day, but where's the 4s and 5s and 6s and 7s? They start catching on, and if they get too much pressure, they'll just lock up. And if it doesn't look like the real thing, they're not going to eat it. Which brings me to a really great big bass bait. There's multiple different ones out there, but I did tie on a soft-bodied swim bait. This particular bait is going to be very, very similar to a real fish that swims through the water. It's very soft. It's very subtle. You can see this is a Huddleston 68, they call it. It's a very soft body bait, and it's designed to reel very slow and very straight, and it just swims like a regular fish. You just reel it really slow, and this big boot tail has all really subtle action, and it will trigger those big fish a lot of times that won't eat a jig. They won't eat a Cinco or a sinking pool or a drop shot because they've seen 100 of them that week. But they will eat, and they make them in. We fish them anywhere from 4 inch to 10 and 12-inch swim baits in Idaho. There are fish. It's a 2-pounder will eat this 6-inch bait, guys. Don't be afraid to throw a big bait when you want to catch a big fish. And this is one of the things we talk about, and when we're fishing a bait like this, like I said, I can go out and pick up this bait and fish it for hours and maybe never get a bite. But if you're fishing docks, some of you mentioned docks, this is a great search bait, and you will catch some of the biggest bass in the lake on it. You may not get a ton of bites, but the trick with this bait is you'll see just about every fish in there. Because they will come out of the dock and follow. Dan, he's a tournament angler here. He's probably seen the same thing I have when you say, if you throw this down the side of a dock that's got a school of 4 and 5 and 6 pounders on it, every single one of them will come out to the edge of that dock and watch this thing. Even if they don't eat it, half of them will follow it right to the trolling motor. They're just inquisitive. They want to look at it. Then, when you leave that dock and you come back to it, you sneak up, you make long casts with something different, and catch 1 or 2 of those fish. But great way to catch a giant fish. The problem is if you fish it in Hayden or Coeur d'Alene, chances are you're going to get some pike to chew off your $30 swim bait. And they're soft, so make sure you got some glue to glue them back together. I hate throwing these out there, but they catch fish. But those pike do a number on them, and they're expensive. So I throw this on. This is a new ALX Rod Expert Series, Ben Parker signature. It's a swim bait rod. It's made specifically for big swim baits. This is a little bit on the lighter side of a swim bait. This rod will throw up to a 6-ounce bait. It's made just for big baits. It's 7 foot 11 inches. 7 foot 10. It's what they call an extra heavy action. It's got just enough tip to throw a big heavy bait like that, but you notice that it loads up its backbone very quickly. Because when you hook a fish on a bait like this, it's usually a good one. And you want tons of backbone. And you don't play a fish out with a big swim bait. You crank them to the boat. When you hook them, it's not one of those fish where you go out and get to enjoy it. You know, I've caught fish in California, 9 and 10 pounders in Clear Lake, not on a swim bait, on like a flipping stick. And those fish, you can mess with them. With a swim bait, they have a tendency to get their head out of the water and they'll throw it really quick. Once they get that bait up flopping around, they make the hole bigger, and the bait can come out. When you hook one on a swim bait, you get them hooked and you crank them to the boat as fast as you can. I throw mine on. A lot of guys use braids. Some guys use heavy fluorocarbon. I throw these on 30-pound mono with a stiff rod. That's as light as I would go with 30. So, and we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to buzz through just 2 more real quick, and then we're going to take some questions and call it a night. So, my other really, really steadfast big fish bait or any fish bait, spring, summer, fall, it doesn't matter, is a good weedless jig. Black and blue, green pumpkin, anything natural. You can throw these in really heavy cover. I usually throw 2 different ways. This bait I'll throw with 20-pound fluorocarbon. This is the ALX Rod Enox Series Gravity, it's called. It's a 7.5 heavy. So 20-pound fluorocarbon, very, very light rod, but it has tons of backbone and sensitivity. When I set the hook on a fish in a dock, I've got 20-pound line and a stiff rod so I can get them out. Not saying you can't catch them on lighter stuff, but, tournament day, I like to hold them. I like to get them in the boat. So if they're biting heavy, I don't have to downsize. Not saying I don't. I just didn't bring any of that stuff with me. Jim talked about some of the lighter stuff. I'm really talking about just heavier big fish bites. The other thing I would throw outside of a jig would be what we call a punch rig. This is a tungsten weight, bullet weight. I've got a bobber stop here. I've got a punch skirt. You notice there's a plastic skirt like on a spinnerbait, but it's designed to slide on the line. I've got a rodent. This is a Strike King rodent. You can use a sweet beaver or any other creature bait. Doesn't really matter. And I rig it on a 5/0 extra wide strength shaped hook. It's Texas rig. And the bobber stop, very important. This is the bait that I'm going to throw just like a jig, but in really heavy, thick brush. It's a small profile, but bulky. It can fit through small things, but when it lands, it flares out. It's a bulky bait. It's going to attract more big fish than, say, just the rodent by itself. That extra punch skirt is a huge deal for getting a bigger fish to bite. This is going to be thrown on the ALX Brawler. This is a 7'6". I think it's an extra heavy. Yeah, 7'6", extra heavy. When I'm throwing heavy brush, I'm throwing this rod on a high-speed reel with 65-pound braid, straight to the hook. 50, you can get by with 50, but when you're horsing big fish out of cover, you can't do it with 10-pound tips. It just doesn't work. That's why we have so many different rods. Like Jim said, I'm not saying go buy a bunch of rods. Get by with what you can get by with. But I'm just showing you what I use. Each one of these is like my wife's shoes. There's a purpose for every one of them. Jim used the pan analogy. I go with shoes. It works much better. I don't ever want to talk to her about cooking as a job or something. So I just go with shoes. Fair is fair. And anybody that knows me knows that I'm addicted to throwing frogs. I live and die by the frog. And it doesn't matter if it's April or September, I live and die by a frog. And this is one heck of a big fish bait. But even one that's not just the big fish, fish eat it. They love it. And they start in pre-spawn all the way through the bedding. And I catch them under docks even in the fall. They eat it. Good frog rod, ALX toad face, they call it. It's a Zola series toad face. 7'2", medium heavy plus. What that means is it's got a heavy backbone, a medium heavy center, and the plus means it's an extra medium heavy. So it's got a soft tip like a medium heavy, but it's got backbone in it. I don't know if anybody saw the video I was running during the break, but I boat flipped 6-pounders on this rod. It's got a soft tip for accuracy and working the frog very well around tight cover, but heavy backbone for setting the hook and getting them out of that heavy cover. Thick grass, brush, whatever. My frog rod, same thing. I use a fast 7-to-1 gear ratio reel, and I use 50-pound braid on that rod. You had a question?
Do you trim your tails on your frog?
Great question. Do I trim the tails on my frog? Every single one I take out of the package. And there's a little trick to that I will show you, and it'll be a little bit hard from a distance, but I'm happy to show you later. My rule of thumb is take your frog, turn it upside down, and cut your legs even with the end of the eye where you tie your knot. Okay? The reason is because and that's a great question, when these frogs come out of the package, most of the time, most frog manufacturers, it doesn't matter who, they have very, very long legs on them. You've noticed a lot. What happens is the legs are too long on that frog. They cause fish that aren't super aggressive to short strike your frog. They'll come up behind it and grab the legs a lot, and you'll miss them. Or you'll barely get them hooked in the lip with the factory length legs. Yeah, I like to trim them, and a lot of times I'll trim one just about a ½ inch longer than the other. I have frogs that I do a lot of walking the dog with, and I have frogs that I just fish through heavy cover. The frogs that I walk a lot, I trim one leg shorter than the other, and it'll walk much better. Yeah, it's really great. Last, and before we get rolling here, I want to take a minute to mention Rick Lawrence's baits, the Fishing Fool. He's the infamous Fishing Fool. Guys, if you haven't checked these out, I highly recommend it. This is a phenomenal heavy salt sinking stick bait that if you fish Senkos or Ochos or any other bait, you need to give this bait a try. It has much better fall. It flutters as it falls, much like a dry leaf falling in the air. When you rig this on like the 5-inch, I'll throw a 4/0 extra wide gap Texas rig. And I love to skip these baits under brush and docks. They're flatter. They skip like there's no other. You can get them way back under the dock and feed it line and let it sink. Caught a lot of big fish way back in the shadows on these sinking pools. This is one of my favorites. This is a new color that came out, one of them. But I named this bait. It's black and gold. I named it Fool's Gold. And I won. So I get to keep these. Yeah. So, any questions before we get out of here, guys? I'd love to help you learn what you need to learn. Have I had any luck with mice or rats? Those types of baits? Yes. Typically I just buy frogs because it mimics the same thing. So, but yeah, I mean, I've seen in my live world during tournaments, I've had bass regurgitate things when they're stressed. I've seen baby ducks. I've seen lots of bait fish, crawdads. I've seen gophers, mice, snakes. I've seen it all spit up. They eat it all. A mouse and any kind of rodent, that frog will mimic that. And that's one of the reasons I like to throw the white and black and a black. Mostly I'm mimicking with a frog, a mouse, or a blackbird, some kind of bird. Yes, sir. I did not. To be honest, I don't throw one very much. I'm more of a power. I'm not saying I never throw one, but if I'm throwing a wacky rig, it would be like a stick bait hooked in the middle, and I would fish that sinking pool the same place that I would fish that, and I really never found a lot of. I will wacky rig smaller baits on a drop shot at times when they're not eating it Texas rig, but I'd much rather have it rigged weedless any given day. So not a bad bait to throw. It's really foolproof, and you just throw it out and let it sink. So that's the way to go. Fishing pool. That's why that's the same type of thing. It's easy to fish. You throw it out, let it sink. So, go ahead.
Lake down in Mexico, when I bought a couple nuts from him, he said.
Oh, big bait fishermen. See, these young kids, man, they're getting into this stuff. It's crazy.
He told me to get the protein colored puddles,
Mm-hmm.
and he said he liked those over perch.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was wondering what he was like.
I agree. Yeah, even perch eaters tend to like the kokanee or the lighter colored bait trout better. I don't know why, but rainbow trout, even, and I brought one, I didn't mention it, but I did bring a Kitech rig like Jim passed around that we would throw for big smallmouth. Same thing. I throw this in places that those fish don't even eat kokanee. They eat perch, but they eat this better than they do a perch colored bait. So, for some reason. Any other questions?
So where would you target the bass on the north end of Coeur d'Alene right now? The water.
I wouldn't. He asked, where would I target largemouth on the north end of Coeur d'Alene in 39-degree water? I wouldn't. Just be patient. Especially with the water rising, and for one, it's unsafe. The lake is no wake right now. Number two, it's just too cold for largemouth. They're not going to be up there yet. Smallmouth at 39, you can catch them. I would use a big deep diving crankbait, red and black, and hit every main point I could find. One back there first.
When you fish the frogs, is it all top water or
Yeah. Yeah, all the frogs are floating frogs. So I do throw toads, like a horny toad or something like that, where you cast and reel. But I don't fish them as much as I do a hollow belly frog. Most all my frog fishing is a hollow belly frog, which is strictly top water. Yeah, Dan. No waypoints? Well, it depends how much you got. Yes, sir.
When's the spawn?
Well, that's going to be much later. The spawn is when he's asking, and that depends on, number one, the lake, and number two, the area of the lake. Like, Coeur d'Alene, for instance, I'll pick on that because it's got a lot of different dynamics. The spawn on Coeur d'Alene, the chain lakes, are going to spawn way earlier than the main lake bays and the north end, just because it's much warmer, much quicker. Now, last year they were spawning in late April and May. This year, we'll be lucky to have the water levels stable by then. If you can see them, yeah. But you're going to be looking for water temps stable in the 70s for good spawning largemouth. Now the smallies are going to spawn in upper 50s, low 60s. So you need good stable weather and a moon pattern either 4 or 5 days prior to after the full moon. Same with a new moon. But once you start getting in those water temps, then you can start looking for bits. Anybody else? I think Merlin's ready to give something away.
Woo! Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate you all coming out. Real quick, next week I got a new speaker coming in, Brian Kearns. Going to be talking about fishing, planterboards, downriggers. It's about Lake Pend Oreille. So that's always a popular fishery. It's been excellent, and the fish are getting bigger. So we're really, really pleased to see that fishery come back. And then always a favorite, Jeff Jordan Smith. I don't know who's coming, dad or son, but Fins and Feathers will come in and talk about Coeur d'Alene salmon this year. Some years we have them do pike, and some years salmon, and this year we're going to have them do the salmon seminar for Coeur d'Alene. So 2 good seminars left to go. Let people know, and we'll draw right now.
The one of 6 in the grand prize drawing, which will go in my office. If I can read it, Bart Belcroft? Bell what?
Can't read it, can't have it.
So Bart, you're okay. I've got your email address. So again. We got 6 names for the grand prize and 3 prizes to hand out. So this is going in my office. And I think Rick from Fishing Pools said his lures work the best, and you got to try them. So what do you want to do?
I'm going to hand out some baits.
Do you want any names, or do you not
I'm
want?
going to draw names a little later, but
Okay.
right
So I'll
now,
say up here.
I'm impressed with this young man right here, so he gets to pick of whatever he wants to. Which pack do you want? We got
I'll take the front gold one.
the front gold one.
Bulls go.
Bulls go. Tony's bait.
Okay. Who's proud of being an American?
Woo!
I saw this hand first.
Red, white, and blue.
Blue. Watch
Okay.
Those are your new rods.
They cost more than his car.
I got 4 more packs here that we're going to pick names for, and everybody
How about big thanks, Rick, too. That's awesome. What do we got? Murakami? Did I say that right?
he already got somebody's going to get some more. Okay, draw another name.
I'm digging deep.
Thank you.
Uh-oh.
Doug Peters.
Right here.
Nice.
Thank you.
Go. Got 2 more left.
We should have a wrestling match.
Come fight over it.
Okay, that'll be the winner of the second one. Jim Blackburn.
Oh.
Congratulations, Jim.
Jim
And-
Blackburn.
Yeah, there it is, Jim Black. No, Matt Dilly. There you go, Matt. Rick, thank you. Merlin, thank you.
For the donations, Rick. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, we'll draw. Yeah. The question